you remember who was playing there for your grand opening?
Yeah, we settled on the place in September, 9th, 10th, or 11th of 87. And I started a jam session almost within a week or two. And I used different guys I knew, Bill Schilling. I used some guys that I knew from University of the Arts to play at the jam session, including Dill McDaniel. Do you know Dill? Bass player. I remember him playing, and some other people, and John Simon and I had a 2 tenor sax group, and we had Chris Taylor as a pianist. So Chris Taylor came and played really early. But then, okay, so this becomes how did I? The other question is, how did I come to hire Shirley Scott? So those two things kind of tied
that and your booking strategy.
And my booking strategy and so forth and so on. So of course, I knew I wanted to run music as close to full time as I could possibly do, not just on the weekends like the little weekend bars like Carolina's or somebody like that. So I thought about different kinds of people, like Herbie Nicks maybe, because I really loved his playing, and I talked to him, I think, and he was playing by that time. Gertz, I think, was just passing into history, and that's another part of the story I didn't cover. John Simon asked me to go down and excuse me for doubling back, but he asked me to go and talk to. They were selling the building, Gertz, and John Simon said, "You want to take over the jazz club because Gertz doesn't. She's tired. She don't want to do it anymore." And I went and talked to. We had a meeting, and they said no. I mean, that didn't last very long because they said, no, we don't want a jazz club in here, whoever it was. So that was kind of also in the background of, getting me interested in running a jazz club. Well, if not Gertz, then what, kind of thing. But anyhow, now I have the place, and I don't know if we never did really have a grand opening, so to speak, but a couple of different people, first, I think it was George Towns. I was talking to different people who do you want to use in there? George Towns said, why don't you call Shirley Scott? I'm like, well, I can't call Shirley Scott. I mean, she's like jazz royalty, And then a couple days later, Fred Miles said, why don't you call Shirley Scott? Now, when the second person says the same thing, okay, so I called Shirley Scott. And she asked me, what do you want to do, this kind of thing. And I think later on she said she was impressed by the fact I didn't want to just put the musicians behind a potted plant. I wanted to, and I wanted it more than 2 nights a week. So she says, okay, I'll come in there. And so we made arrangements. She started October 1st of 1987. And she walked in with Bobby Durham and Benny Nelson on bass, and they started Wednesday night, October 1st. And for a while, we did 4 nights. Shirley did 4 nights a week. One night as a trio, one night as a quartet, and additional guest artists on the weekend, Friday and Saturday. And after 3 weeks, Bobby Durham had to go out on the road, honor our commitment with Oscar Peterson to go out on the road. So I'll never forget, Shirley Scott walked in with Mickey Roker, and I think still Benny Nelson. She had a big grin on her face. Look who I got, And I didn't know that much about Mickey Roker. I knew about Bobby Durham, but I didn't know that.
I wanted to ask you, in context of all this, how familiar were you with Philly jazz history when you bought this club? I mean, did you? Obviously, you learned a lot along the way.
Right.
Did you really know how rich the city's history was?
Not to the extent that, of course, that I do now, but I did know. I knew. I made in answer, looking at your questions, I thought to myself, well, how many of these people did I know? Right at that juncture,
Right.
And of course, 84, 85, I knew about Herbie Nicks and everybody, but I already knew Bootsy, because I went I knew him fairly well, and he was always kind. He out at Natalie's, I remember him saying, "Hey, come out to so and so on not Germantown Avenue. What's the other one that runs
Ridge?
On Ridge?" He said, "Come out to this place on Ridge. You're always welcome." I knew Charlie Bowen very well. I knew Charlie. Who's the guy we talked about earlier? The piano player. GP, Gerald Price.
Oh, Gerald.
I knew all about Gerald. I knew Gerald Price. I went to see him.
You were plugged in.
What?
You were plugged in.
I was plugged in, but not to the extent that I knew every bass player that played with Blakey or I didn't know all those guys,
All right. Finish the Mickey Roker story.
So Shirley walks in with Mickey Roker, and that became the group, Mickey, and then after, I don't know how long it was before Arthur would alternate with Benny Nelson, but then he became the bass player, and that was probably after about a year, and that became the trio: Shirley, Mickey, and Arthur. And then and then Bobby Durham. After a little while, I think Mickey and Bobby worked out a thing where this is for a couple of years. One guy be there for 2 weeks and the other guy be there for 2 weeks, and that was like it was kind of like unbelievable in so many ways because their styles were quite different.
Yeah.
Because his hero was Art Blakey, and Mickey's hero was Philly Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very different. Mickey was very, very sophisticated, and Bobby, as John Simon used to say, is like the magic carpet ride, the Art Blakey tight shuffle, so different, but so on such a high level. It was such a high level. It was hard for me to, the culture. It was a cultural shock almost to be with people of that caliber, be around them.
Now, how'd you negotiate the money with Shirley?
I know that I thought about that, and I was going to drag out my records, but I don't have it all. I think on the weekends they started out getting either 90 or 100, the sidemen on the weekends. Now that was a lot more than, and on the Tuesday night jam session, the guys got 70. Everybody got 70 for the trio, and then later on bumped it up to 75, and then it was that way for a long time. And on the other weeknight groups, Bootsy and I had a arrangement where, I think it was either 2.25 or 240 or something like that. And if there was a better than a certain gross, maybe we'd bump it up 20 or something like that. But Shirley and Mickey and Arthur, I think they started out at 90, and the guest artists who, depending on who it was, either 100, 125, 150 if it was a guy coming down from New York.
Right.
Yeah, Eric Alexander.
And what was the I remember the cover. Tell me about how you decided the cover charges for the.
So the cover charge was, we didn't charge a cover charge at all for the first, never on weeknights, even till the very last. But we never charged a cover. And Bootsy and I used to talk about this a lot. He advised me not to do a cover charge, and because who was the guy that had the place on Arch Street?
I know what you're talking about.
The place on
T. Monroe.
T. Monroe's.
Right.
Yeah.
He sort of thought that that they charged a cover charge, and they had the Art Blakey series, and those guys coming in on Monday or Tuesday, and he thought that was not a good thing to do. And I listened to that, and Margaret and I used to have animated discussions about it quite often, because she wanted to charge a cover charge a lot earlier than I finally did do. But all the way through the 90s, I didn't charge a cover charge. I think I started on the weekends maybe after 2001, and I can look back at my records. It was either 2001, 2, somewhere in that range. I started charging the cover charge on the weekends. Most of the time, 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I wanted to. Now, when did you start getting the crowds in there? Almost immediately with Shirley?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't think so. I think the first year and maybe even year and a half, and I'll try to look back at some of that. I can look back at some of that a little later and tell you. But I think there were many bleak periods in the first about a year. Maybe at the end of '88, it got busy, but our food situation was rather interesting. You know, Margaret worked back in the kitchen, and you know, she kind of took over the kitchen. I kind of did the bar, one of the questions you asked,
Yeah.
Suzanne, was, did I do any bar business before that?
Yeah.
I didn't know jack you know what about the bar. No, I had no experience in the bar. And in fact, I'll add to that by saying, I was still living in Springfield, just getting ready to, you know, do this, and we bought the house first. And my next door neighbor was a fellow by the name of Pete Anselo, and he ran a place called the Gray Fox down in Aston Township. And I said, Pete, I'm thinking about buying a bar, you know, and running jazz. He looked at me like I was crazy. Why would you want to do a thing like that? Knowing that I didn't know anything about the bar business, you know. But also, you know, I guess he had this, you know, you have a vision of people, and he's thinking, I had a good career in the corporate world. Why the hell would I ever want to do something like that? So we hired a chef to get to the answer to your question. We hired a chef, Fritz Kohler. I believe it was in early '89. Now I have to look back but he suggested we do a Cajun menu, and I think that really helped. We, you know, put us a little bit over the top. We had good food to offer along with, you know, along with the good music, you know. So that was either at the end of '88 or the beginning of '89, and I think we got busy around that, very busy around that time.
Okay, now another question I had was, when did you start the Tuesday night jams with the famous Jazz Haus rhythm section? You know, Mike Boone, Sid.
I wrote that down. I wrote that down, but it's not on that piece of paper. Oh, I think it's on here. It's, yes. Do you mind if I look at a piece of paper?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yes, Sid started playing with some of the other rhythm section members, including Bill Zeno on bass, and other people, maybe in the '93, '94. But that particular rhythm section, Sid, Byron, and Mike, started in November of '95.
What do you think? Why did they click so quickly?
Those three guys?
Yeah.
That's a great question. That's a great question. Well, Mike, of course, has big ears, huge ears. And he's a interesting personality. So he, of course, the bass player always ties everything together. And Sid is such a great comper. I can remember playing where sometimes, if you're lacking any inspiration, Sid would create a motif, and it's like, wow, holy shit, there's something to build on. And then Byron is he's very sophisticated, and very modern, and a great player. So Mike pulled that all together. I don't know if that answers your question, but they definitely did, and they love to play together. You know, they just love to play together, and they could. And Mike, I've heard him say before in an interview I just was participating in. He credits all of them listening to Shirley, Mickey, and Arthur. I mean, and they were in there all the time listening to them. You know, so like it was like going to school, listening to them play.
Now, what started that whole feeling that this was like the jazz home for Philly jazz community? Was it that jam session that created that vibe when you'd have all the musicians coming in? And I mean, because
It was partly, but it was partly the jam session. I can remember Roger Prieto saying, you know, he looked around and every musician from Trenton was in there one night, you know, like, so yeah, people would come from all over. But I also remember there was one night, and this was really early in the ball game. We're on the bandstand, we're playing, and I looked over, and you know, the little sort of end of the bar there, right to the left of the bandstand, there's, I hope I can remember these names, there's Ray Bryant is standing there, Evelyn Sims' husband, the baritone sax player, Lonnie Shaw, Lonnie Shaw, Ray Bryant, and this other guy, I remember his name sometimes. He was the guy that was on records with Dizzy, bald-headed guy. Bootsy was the one who told me that that's so-and-so. And they're all three standing there. And I'm like, what? This is what's happening. You know, they're coming to see Shirley and Mickey, of course. But, I mean, and that happened a lot. But that night sticks out in my mind because, okay, this means something to these people. Because the band could play. Well, Orrin Evans said one time, you know, he would be somewhere else and they'd tell you what to play. But, you know, I wasn't telling anybody what to play, you know. So, and the music was on such a high level.
right.
And I think also I also oftentimes heard people talk about what a high level, even at the jam session, the high level the music was on. Like a lot of people says, I came in there, but I wouldn't play. I'm like, what do you mean you wouldn't play? You know, everybody's welcome to play, you know. So, but, yeah.
Yeah, that was one night. Pat Martino came in. Jim Riddle was playing. I guess he was a sub for Sid or something.
Yeah.
And so Pat came in, and I was there, and you know, it was there always seemed to be tons of musicians in there.
Well, Denny de Blasio said a nice thing to me one time. He says, Pete, you know, the thing is, I can have a guest from out of town, and I can come into Ortlieb's on any night of the week, and I don't have to worry about the quality. It's always going to be top quality, and that was a really nice thing he said. But I think it was true. You know, there's always happening stuff in there. You know, yeah.
So the other clubs at that time in Philly, I guess, was maybe
Zanzibar and Chris's.
Chris's. I mean, they were your main.
They were the main
competition, if you want to call it.
Oh, and what was the place over? We used to go there for pizza when I worked at Sun Oil. What was it?
Oh, the one
where Jimmy Bruno was playing.
Yeah.
Oh, the Grotto?
Yeah.
The JJ's Grotto.
Yeah.
JJ's Grotto for quite a while too, and it was a good spot too, you know.
But I mean, it seemed like Ortlieb's, as you were saying, was kind of like the place.
I didn't think so.
Huh?
I didn't think so. JJ's Grotto?
No, I said Ortlieb's
Oh.
was the among all
yeah.
these places.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow or other, it became that, yeah.
Yeah, and like as Suzanne was saying, so there. I mean, in terms of legendary clubs in Philly, you know, I mean, if you go back, you know, Peps and Showboat and all, and people now talk about Ortlieb's.
Well, Bob Perkins interviewed me one time, not too long after I had the club, and he said everybody says this is the vibe that Peps and Showboat used to have, and you know, after Peps and Showboat, of course, Philly always had Aqua Lounge. I always think of Aqua Lounge in the '70s. And then the place on Broad Street in the '80s that woman's.
Bynum's had, right?
No, the place that the
Cadillac Club?
No, the what was her a woman's name?
Oh,
Oh.
Loretta. No. I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
But anyhow, I went to see Al Gray there. They had a front room. In fact, John Simon had the house band in the front room, and they had the downstairs where you'd pay the cover to go downstairs.
Oh.
Oh, it almost came to me. But anyhow, I want to mention Al Gray, by the way. Al, because I went to sit in with Al Gray at that place. It's on the tip of my tongue. And, you know, he said, hang out with the cats. That's what you got to do, that sort of. But I hired him as a guest artist early in the book, like '89, to come in and play with Shirley, and Nelson, who's a critic, came in to see Al Gray because he loved Al Gray, and he's playing there, and that was a revelation too, hearing, standing next to Al Gray and hearing him play and everything. So anyhow, he went back to Nelson and he said, if you write about any place, write about this place. So that helped us, because every once in a while Nelson would give us a play, in the paper, in the daily news.